Basically, and today we're going to talk about the year 2022. Is this the year of freight disruption? And with that, we have a triumvirate of guests that are joining us here today. Mike BAUDENDISTEL, our head of Intermodal Solutions, also Kevin Hill, our director of research, and Dr. Sal MERCOGLIANO with us, who is, of course, associate professor of history at Campbell University. We've got rail, we've got trucks, we've got ships, we've got everything covered, or most about everything covered here. We just need Eric Coolidge to jump in on air cargo. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Mike, I know you were on earlier and talked a little bit about this. Obviously, the rail industry has gotten their three-person panel from President Biden to kind of oversee things as they continue to work through their negotiations right now. What do you see right now as the biggest problem in the industry at the moment? Because right now there seems to be things right and left. You mentioned personnel, you mentioned labor. Obviously, you've got these talks here as well. What's objective number one if you were in charge of the entire rail industry? What do you want to fix first?
Well, objective number one is having enough people. I mean, that's really been the big thing. Usually the railroads can scale up and down their number of employees. When volume drops like it did in 2020, they scale down the number of employees. Usually when volumes come back, they don't have any problem, calling those workers, back in. Some of them are furloughed, some they terminate, and they just come right on back because they can make more with the railroad than they can make doing what they were doing in the interim. That didn't happen this time. And that might be because the job market is just so tight for skilled industrial labor. But I think a large part of it is that morale is poor on the railroads, and a lot of those employees left with a bad taste in their mouth and don't want to enter an industry where you can see that they're asked to do more, do more with fewer people, and you can see that overall that the trend in number of employees they have, keeps declining. So I really think it's personnel.
Sal, let me jump to you. The ILWU and the ports in LA Long Beach are going through their negotiations now. You mentioned about 6 weeks or 2 months ago, before these negotiations got started, the fact that the ILWU was coming in really strong. They had a very strong position at that particular point. What do you look at now? Obviously, they're past their deadline, and there's also a great degree of shifting in terms of ships headed to the East Coast and away from LA Long Beach at this point. How much of a disruption is this in terms of these negotiations continuing to move on?
Well, obviously, any disruption that happens now is going to have cataclysmic impact on the economy. Unlike 2014, 2015, when freight was down and we were really not pushing the system to the maximum. Right now, labor is in that commanding position. They really are. And more importantly, the PMA and the companies in the PMA, the Pacific Maritime Association, are awash in cash. They intentionally punted this down the road 6 years when they decided in 2014, 2015 not to renegotiate. And even then, there were issues of slowdowns. There were allegations from the PMA that the ILWU was slowing down. The ILWU said, no, it's the PMA orchestrating this. We're in a very tenuous situation. And obviously the ILWU wants to see a pay raise, but at the same time, they're pushing against the issue of automation. And if you look at the latest reports that have come out about U.S. ports, the issue that gets flagged on all the time is automation. Long Beach and LA are at the bottom of 370 ports around the world in terms of efficiency. So you've got that push for efficiency by the PMA. At the same time, the ILWU is really against the automation that's going to phase out their workers, and they want to see more money that the PMA is awash in.
Kevin, we heard just earlier this show from Clarissa Hawes, who's in Oakland covering the protests there concerning AB 5. Obviously, that's a California situation right now, but because it's a Supreme Court ruling, it becomes national and can be enacted across any portion of the country. How much is this a distraction or disruption for truckers, especially obviously independent contractors, owner-operators? Is this going to be a disruption in late 2022, 2023 if these regulations start to be enforced or on independent contractors?
It is. It's going to be a major disruption. We haven't seen it yet. It's going to take some time for it to go into effect and be able to see the real reactions. And Bill, you mentioned it right there. I think that's the key. How strongly are these regulators? Is AB 5 going to be enforced? When is it going to start being enforced? What's the enforcement process? What's the legal process behind that if you're not in compliance? But I think eventually everyone will have to be in compliance, or some part of compliance, maybe not 100%. But that's going to be difficult because there's a lot of carriers out there who operate the owner op leased on type of model that will then have to start reclassifying these owner operators as employees. And in the past, whenever owner operators in any industry, especially in trucking, have sued to be reclassified, it turns into a bit of a mess. So we'll probably see that later on in 2022. Maybe it won't start until 2023, but I think in the next few weeks, we'll start getting some indication of a timeline and kind of the process.
Mike, let me come back to you, and Sal, I'll ask you this question as well. One of the parts of the negotiations between management and labor in both of your modes of transportation is the idea of technology, and in terms of what the role of technology is going to be. In rail, you're looking at track monitoring, you're looking at brake monitoring, and that, of course, perhaps takes some jobs away from the union in those particular cases. I'm sure there's going to be, there's the equivalent or somewhat of the equivalent in the shipping industry as well. That's got to be a sticking point here for unions. Mike, how do you see this thing working forward, especially when you're looking at deals that are going to be multi-year? This is not going to be something that, or I guess they could make a short deal and then come back and revisit things, but you're looking at an industry and many industries that don't know what's going to happen next year, let alone 5 years from now. How does this technology argument impact the negotiations?
Yeah, I think it's a real concern that labor will get in the way of technological progress. And historically, the rails have made technological progress in order to streamline their rigs. There used to be cabooses on railroads, and now that's done with a component, and it went from having 4-man crews to 2-man crews. So to me, that's sort of the nature of technology is you can do things more efficiently. And some of those things you brought up, like the track inspection, which can be done by a machine, and brake inspection, those can be done by a machine much more effectively than they can be done by humans. And so by inhibiting technological progress, you're not just inhibiting efficiency, you're inhibiting improvements in safety as well. So you would hate to see that on some of those safety issues. And the big ultimate question, I think, for rails and technology would be, are eventually do we go to 1-man crews instead of 2-man crews? Right now, you need to have 2, men, engineer and conductor on each train. That's helpful when there's a train separation and some things happen like that. But with positive train control, which is system designed to stop a train in the event of any human error, you would think that a 2-man crew is no longer necessary.
Sal?
You always got to be careful about striking and protesting against technology. In 1946, the elevator workers in New York went on strike, and they were replaced by buttons in elevators. And, where are the toll booth workers today? You have to be really careful about that. But the issue, I think, for the ports in particularly is taking a look at what Long Beach has done with the LBCT terminal, for example, which underwent a 10-year modernization and is the most efficient port in LA Long Beach versus the other ports that need to follow that model. Just because you're automating doesn't mean you're eliminating jobs in the ports. You're just transitioning over to different styles of jobs. And more importantly, it's the technology and the throughput. You're not going to get more land. You're not going to get more areas to put down containers. You've got to make the ports more productive. And that requires new technologies, and it requires, the concept of changing how ports operate in the United States. And even if LA and Long Beach go down from 40% down to 30%, in terms of total containers into the United States, that's still a substantial amount. And so labor has some leverage here, but they got to be careful about fighting against this technology because there are other ports out there that are fighting for their business and getting it. Just look at Savannah.
Yeah, Kevin, let's move back to trucking here for just a second. Obviously, AB5 has gotten the large headlines as far as maybe disruptions go, but looking on down the line, obviously this is another industry that's in massive transition. What are the big concerns for you moving forward that could be hurdles that have to be overcome for trucking to kind of maneuver itself into the 21st century? Obviously, net zero carbon issues are there. Trying to lower emissions is there. What do you see as the major difficulty in that area?
It's a good point. Net zero carbon and kind of electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles. This whole technology theme that we're talking about right now is that technology always wins. From the start of human history, we have just developed better and better technologies up until today. Technology always wins. So I think it is keeping up. If you look at trucking 10 years ago, it was really in the dark ages when it comes to technology, right? There's a lot of manual processes outside the cab, inside the cab, safety being one of those. I think vehicles, the race to autonomous vehicles, and whenever that shows up on the road, it shows up on the road. I'm not a predictor of that, but this race to autonomy and electric vehicles has really improved safety and fuel efficiency. So it's been a boom for safety. A lot of technology has advanced, and you can see that in the cars you drive on the road. Same kind of technology that's in the trucks to make it, driver assist, make it more safe. And I think that's the real key, and the real win for everybody is all of these technological advances inside the cab have just made things safer for everyone out on the roads.
Well, we're going to have to wrap things up with this question. I'll ask all three of you the same thing, but and each of you probably has about 45 seconds or so to your own will. Let's start with Mike, though. In terms, obviously, we're seeing an incredible amount of disruption in the rail industry. Certainly, some in shipping and some in trucking. But right now, how optimistic are you in terms of moving forward, and in terms of rail? How many bumps and bruises is the industry going to take before it can maybe gets through this?
So it's an interesting question, because if you're pessimistic on the economy, you might be optimistic on rail congestion. And that's sort of where I am. I think, the economy is slowing down, and I think that's going to lead to lower volume. And I think that's going to help the rails get some of this cleaned up. In terms of getting the people employed, that is a challenge with morale being low.
Sal, how optimistic are you about certainly the negotiations in LA Long Beach? And obviously, as you said, any disruption there proves to be an incredible tidal wave that may go across, to use a pun, to go across the shipping industry.
Yeah, this has all got to operate like a gearbox. I mean, everything has got to be in mesh, and everything's got to be working. Road, rail, air, and ships have all got to be in sync. And what we keep seeming to do here is throw a gear or miss a gear. And all these disruptions accumulate over time. And what you don't want to have is a catastrophic transmission explosion. And right now with shipping has got the capacity to handle what's coming its way. The question is, going forward in a few years, what begins to happen as freight slows down, as ocean shipping starts to slow down? How do the big ocean carriers accommodate to this? We've got a big technology issue in terms of propulsion looming on the horizon. And the question really becomes is, how are the big shipping companies able to accommodate their newfound wealth, and how are they investing that money?
Kevin, we just heard on State of Freight that the workhorse of the American economy is the freight truck, or the long-haul freight truck. How optimistic are you about things? And I'll give you the last word in terms of maybe how do you see the entire freight economy working out over the next year, 2 years, 3 years?
I think over the past 2 years, capacity has been built up, not just in trucking, but in all areas, ocean, rail. The economy slowing down, the consumer is going back to their long-term trends, so there's going to be less freight moved. Then you have inflation, which puts a downward pressure on the number of units moved. So I think we're going to go into, 2023 is going to be overcapacity. I think it's probably going to be an overcapacity in most every mode. And I think, you're looking at another 12 to 18 months of a freight recession. And it could be really severe, depending on how much capacity that we've built up and how that plays out. Because I think everyone in all modes, trucking certainly, has worked diligently to expand capacity to meet the needs. And I think that demand or those load volumes are trending down. So it takes a long process to whittle out to capacity, and I think that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a winner of 12 to 18 months.
Well, we should do this more often, to have all three of you on to talk a little bit more about what it is that each of these three modes of transportation are going through. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, we'll take a short break and come back after this to wrap things up on our show today.